Things, Words, Meaning, Part 3. In going over the points I have made so far, I see it would be easy to mistake what I am saying with the main line of postmodern philosophy, especially as exemplified by Jacques Derrida. Derrida's main point was encapsulated in his famous saying that, quote, "there is nothing outside the text," unquote. Words are signifiers signifying only other signifiers. There is no way to connect the so-called real world of physical or mental objects through words. It may sound as if I'm saying that, but I'm actually saying the opposite. I am saying there is nothing inside the text. All meaning proceeds from physical and mental objects, experiences, etc., from the outside, never the inside. Nor does Derrida's dictum bear relation to Wittgenstein's case for language games. Wittgenstein said clearly that a workman, for example, asking another workman for a screwdriver, was playing a game that required the second workman to hand him a physical object called a screwdriver. If the screwdriver handed the first workman a Phillips type when what was intended in the game was a slot screwdriver, then the game requires another word, slot, in order to proceed. The game consists of objects and signifiers in constantly changing relationship to each other, the way pieces in a chess game change relationship to each other depending on the board. What does not happen, according to Wittgenstein, is word as something definite and defined. He makes that clear in the Blue Book, where he dismisses definitions as answers to puzzles about meaning. Quote, "A word hasn't got a meaning given to it, as it were, by a power independent of us, so that there could be a kind of scientific investigation into what the word really means. A word has the meaning someone has given to it," unquote. That's Wittgenstein from the Blue Book. This is in the context of the language game, where the meanings we attach to words are always changing. That's what Wittgenstein intended to describe here. This is where there never exists a single object to which a single word bears exact adequation. We can never be assured that the word X corresponds precisely, universally, and changelessly to a particular physical or mental object in the world of the language game. But at one point in the Blue Book, Wittgenstein suggests that actually a certain kind of definition might allow us to define words in a way that stick to their meaning, as it were. This is the ostensive definition, and it consists simply of pointing at the object defined. We know ostensive definitions from how we define colors. The color yellow, for example, is defined only by pointing to it, only by empirical identification. It literally cannot be defined any other way. The usual objection to this is that, wait, colors correspond to certain wavelength frequencies, so we may define yellow by its frequency. This is false for two reasons. First of all, if we know the frequency of yellow, that does nothing to tell us what the experience of yellow is, and color is a specific experience. A blind person told that the color yellow is the frequency of such and such will still not know what yellow is. Furthermore, color-blind persons have been known to see red upon encountering the wavelength frequency for blue. Does this mean that blue is sometimes red? That is the conclusion we'd have to come to if we agreed upon wavelength frequency as the definition of color. No, blue is always blue, and is not definable by its wavelength frequency, since in some cases it is seen as red. Blue is defined by pointing at it, just as every other color is. Frequency is one thing, color is another. My case is not that words refer merely to other words, signifiers signifying signifiers, as Derrida would say, but that words cannot be given definition other than the ostensive. I mean this to apply not only to colors, but to everything. No word contains the meaning of an object. Rather, a word is a tag we hang on the concept we have of something. We will come back to what a concept is a little later. Therefore, a word cannot bear the weight of a definition other than the ostensive. This applies to all words. Now, this idea of the ostensive definition, of a definition that does nothing more than point at a physical or mental object, shows up in the highly esteemed work of Saul Kripke. Although he does not use the word ostensive, Kripke calls certain kinds of words rigid designators. He makes it clear in his famous work, Naming and Necessity, that proper names have no definitions in the usual sense. If we try, for example, to define Aristotle as the author of the Metaphysics, and we find out tomorrow that the Metaphysics were actually written by a student of his, Would he stop being Aristotle? Of course not. If Richard Nixon is defined as a former president of the United States, it ignores the possibility that he very well may not have won the 1968 election. Had he lost, would he still have been Richard Nixon? Of course he would. Later in his book, Kripke strongly suggests that what he has said about proper names applies to nouns of all sorts. If we call something gold and make it conform to a certain description, for instance, all gold is a yellow stone, and then we find a substance that is also a yellow stone but is actually iron pyrite or fool's gold, we don't call this another kind of gold, but something else entirely. Quoting Kripke from Naming and Necessity, quote, "We can say this not because we have changed the meaning of the term gold and thrown in some other criteria which distinguish gold from pyrites. On the contrary, we discovered that certain properties were true of gold in addition to the initial identifying marks by which we originally identified it." In other words, and that's unquote, in other words, it's the properties of the physical object that have the meaning and contain the meaning, not any word we attach to something. The thing contains the meaning, and when new information comes along that changes the meaning, we expand the concept to include other identifying marks, but we do not change the word. We do not expand the word to include fool's gold because the word gold has no meaning other than naming the thing that is actually gold, the concept of which calls forth the word gold in whatever language. In other words, words do not name things, they name or label concepts, which in turn are the identities or experiences of things. We have the concept of water, or of love, or of gold, or of camels, and in order to hold on to them, we must associate that concept with a sound or spelling. Thus we need words. The danger comes when the words are treated as if they, and not the things themselves, somehow confer identity to the concept named. It is, of course, precisely the other way around. The concept, derived from the thing, confers identity, and the word is the tag for the concept. I am not using concept here to refer to abstraction, but to the grasping of an identity. An artist sees a landscape and grasps its identity, its essence. That's a concept which depends upon her skill as an artist, and depending upon that skill, she will bring to fruition that vision on canvas. Someone else sees the same landscape. Well, no one can see the same landscape, but what I mean, of course, is that someone else looks out at the same view, and it's doubtful even that the two persons could actually have the same view. But the point is that the non-artist looks and tags what she sees as landscape. The concept subsumed under that tag is limited, but the artist paints the landscape, and if she is successful, the painting is her concept represented visually, a vastly superior conveyance of meaning than a mere word. The painting is a final concrete statement of her concept, whereas the word landscape is merely a generalized term for a view of some land. Because words are just tags standing for concepts, and not the concepts themselves, which was the case with our hypothetical artist, a work of art becomes the concept itself somehow. Mere language games evolve from this situation. A certain sound or spelling cannot for long be attached to a specific concept before it wanders off into Das Man chatter. A major piece of pop culture serves to illustrate this wandering off from a word that labels a concept to a word that is used willy-nilly in a game. In Monty Python's Life of Brian, the Brian character, supposedly a Christ figure, swings wide his window one morning to see a crowd of fanatics waiting on his every word. Wanting to be rid of them, but also intending to impart some authentic advice, Brian says, "You are all individuals." What he is pointing at with this phrase, the concept he is pointing out with these words, is that each individual person must decide things for himself. That is clearly the concept for which the words "you are all individuals" are a tag. So what does the crowd do? It parrots back, "Yes, we are all individuals," chanted together in unison. The crowd is not pointing at the same idea at all. Rather, it has taken the phrase, or word, if you will, and turned it into its opposite, acting and speaking not as individuals, but as a mob. This distortion of concept by the twisting of words happens all the time. Given this understanding, it's actually easy to see how freedom of slavery came to be a bit of accepted propaganda in Orwell's 1984. Freedom is, in its originary designation, in its primordial language, to use Heidegger's phrase, the condition of being able to make individual choices without outside coercion. But it is frighteningly easy to say something like, freedom means having to be self-responsible and therefore having to do things you may not wish to do, and doing things you don't wish to do is slavery. Therefore, freedom is slavery. What is shocking is that a very large number of people would agree with that bit of sophistry, just as a disheartening number of folks would say that, since racism has primarily been directed at people of color, it does not designate the act of judging according to race, but rather refers to the general attitude of all white people. Words as tags for concepts are indispensable, but words as stand-ins for the truth are dangerous to the extreme. A word about politics. I'm sure it's been noted that such few political comments that have entered this commentary have favored the so-called political right, and that is for a very good reason. Bad philosophy, and by that I mean all dualistic thinking coming down to us from Descartes on, and especially as it has come to rest on postmodernists a la Derrida, favors the left. It favors the left because the left starts with normative judgments about classes, cultures, and economic systems without first stating any ontological foundation. Leftist politics are inherently judgmental. They use words in whatever way words can serve their agenda, which, as I say, they proclaim initially rather than as a product of any thematic undertaking. One prominent Marxist philosopher, Alain Badiou, has even gone so far as to relegate the entire realm of ontology to mathematics, so as to put that aside, as one of his adherents once put it to me, and get on with the business of upending Western civilization. Imagine putting aside ontology for whatever reason and identifying it with mere mathematics. Real philosophy, which is to say, any philosophy that understands its function as the gleaning of reality, as the grasping of the meaning of physical and mental objects, as the, quote, knowledge of the essence of things, Heidegger's words, inevitably serves the political right, because the political right, notwithstanding its failures and errors and betrayals and hideous mistakes, knows that the world is real and we are free. When it does its job properly, the political right builds political theory on the clear understanding that no moral or social judgment can be made without first understanding the nature of existence and of humanity, and that humanity's essential freedom, evoked so beautifully in Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, is the basis of any truth, including political truth. There can be no political truth without freedom as its foundation, and that is essentially a definition of the political right. Where words are tracked for the concepts behind them, for ostensive definitions that point to true meaning, real philosophy is at work. Let me repeat that in a different way, slightly. Real philosophy is at work wherever words are tracked for the concepts behind them, rather than dealt with as words, that is, as mere tags, which can be shifted around. When you deal with the ostensive definitions that point to true meaning, that is real philosophy. Nothing else is. When words are manipulated to the end of achieving political agendas, falsehood holds sway and tyranny thrives. This is the heart of leftist politics. By way of concluding, I would like to quote the philosopher Eva Braun, and I'm not quite sure, I've just discovered this person, and I'm not quite sure the pronunciation of her name. It bears an unfortunate resemblance to Hitler's mistress. It is not Eva Braun, but it is Eva, E-V-A. Braun is B-R-A-N-N. Not Brown, but Braun. Eva Braun. She is with a university that I cannot call to mind. Oh, St. John's College in Maryland, I believe. Braun writes concerning Parmenides, whom Aristotle called the father of philosophy. Quote, what Parmenides says, that what is, and in merely being is without inner distinction, all one, is compelling since we have no immediate speech with which to deny it. We cannot say being is different from itself, being is not being is not being, but it is also monstrous. It negates both our multifarious world, the one in which we are at home, along with the very possibility of articulate speech itself, since we may never say anything of anything other than that it is. Unquote. I agree with Braun's explication of Parmenides, but not with her characterization of it as monstrous. What she reads as the negation of articulate speech itself, I read as the proper alignment of meaning with the physical and mental objects of our experience, all of which are indeed one in the sense that they all belong to being. Being is always the being of beings, as Heidegger constantly drilled home, yet being itself remains one. Identity is produced by experience, whenever the experiencer confers upon the experienced the status of real, by experiencing it. Yes, the real is a conferred status, not an a priori condition. Being, idea, the one are the a priori condition. Within this condition lie the experiences that make up the finite entities of our daily world. These entities are the real, their reality having been conferred upon them by being experienced. This idea shows up again and again in that strain of Western thought which is not married to so-called rationality, that is actually evocative of experience. And we're not talking about just philosophers, but others, especially poets. Just the other day, I came upon a quote from the great poet John Keats, who wrote, quote, "Nothing is real until it is experienced," unquote. Precisely. We think of a flower or a stone as a fact, but they are rather self-relational processes, the one rather quickly accomplished and the other one very slowly accomplished. They become real upon our experience of them, or the experience of them by other entities. Experience is all there is, and experience is of any and all finite beings, including ourselves, for we are self-experiencing entities. And these finite experiences, infinite in their potential, are contained by the infinite one, which has no finitude. So here we see that Heidegger was right to say that Parmenides, prophet of the unchanging one, and Heraclitus, for whom everything was change and verisimilitude, were simply stating the same truth from opposite perspectives. All we can say of the experienced entities we encounter is that they exist, they are real, and they are real because they are experienced, and that they exhibit in the experiencing of them certain characteristics, and the only way to define them is to grasp that meaning, conceptualize the experience of them, and hang a tag, a word, on the concept. What is freedom? What is justice? What does equality mean? Remember, when we ask what does this word mean, we are actually searching for a concept attached to a meaningful entity. So it is entirely possible that certain words are entirely meaningless, that they indicate non-existent entities. They point at nothing and claim that it's something. Western civilization is currently drowning in a sea of words that attach themselves willy-nilly to whatever the speakers wish them to express. Definitions are made by the victors, so to speak, so that, for example, when you try to point out that state communism is in essence the same thing as fascism, that is, that the two concepts are interchangeable, you are told, oh no, that's not how the words are defined. They are defined as opposites, which then leads the unconscious listener to conclude that the best escape from fascism must be state communism. Such tricks are the essence of sophistry, just as the commitment to truth outside of mere words is the essence of philosophy. Let's remember the cry of phenomenology's founder, Edmund Husserl, back to the things themselves, and once we have returned there, let's not leave again. We have ended with some things hanging. I have said that meaning resides in objects only, but that our grasp of those objects depends upon the concepts we have of them. So how do we know the concepts we have of them are adequate to the objects we experience? Can they be? And are there degrees of adequation between concepts and objects? This will require delving into a very old argument over knowledge that took the form of realism versus nominalism long ago in the late Middle Ages. It also concerns the forgotten third choice between realism and nominalism, put forth by Peter Abelard, and that is conceptualism. The coming lecture series on this subject will be titled Aesthetics as First Philosophy. This ends Things, Words, Meaning. Thank you.